The ancient chamber beneath the Nexus temple trembled as High Mystic Zarathal pressed her six-fingered hands against the obsidian altar. The crystalline formations embedded in the walls pulsed with desperate energy, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the gathered council members. Representatives from 12 dying civilizations stood in a circle around the summoning platform, their various forms united only by the weight of impending extinction. "The Devourers have consumed the Outer Rim," announced Commander Vexai, his chitinous exoskeleton scarred from countless battles. His people, the Kithara, had been among the galaxy's finest warriors for millennia. Now they were refugees, their homeworlds nothing but empty husks floating in space. 3 systems fell in the last cycle alone. Our fleets, they're nothing against their hunger. Elder Moon Whisper of the Ethereal Collective floated nearby, her translucent form flickering with anxiety. The psychic barriers we've maintained for 10,000 years crumble like morning mist. The Devourers feed on our very thoughts now. They know our strategies before we form them. Zarathal nodded grimly, her violet eyes reflecting the crystal light. The Nexari had been keepers of ancient knowledge since before most species had discovered fire. If anyone understood the gravity of their situation, it was her people. "The Forbidden Archives speak of one last option," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with practiced authority. "A summoning that our ancestors deemed too dangerous to attempt." "Dangerous?" scoffed General Karath, his reptilian features twisted in desperation. The Saurian Empire had once conquered star systems with ease, but their mighty dreadnoughts had been reduced to scrap metal by the Devourers. "We're discussing the extinction of all sentient life in the galaxy. What could be more dangerous than that?" The High Mystic gestured to the ancient texts floating before her, their surfaces covered in script so old that few could read them anymore. The records speak of a species that made the gods themselves tremble. A race so violent, so unpredictable, that they were sealed away in a distant corner of the universe. The texts call them the humans. A collective shiver ran through the assembly. Even among beings who had mastered faster than light travel and harnessed the power of stars, the mention of the humans carried weight. They existed in the darkest legends, stories told to frighten younglings into obedience. "You speak of myths," said Arch-Scholar Quilex, her insectoid mandibles clicking nervously. The collective of minds had spent eons cataloging knowledge across the galaxy, and even they had only fragments about these creatures. "Tales to frighten children." "Surely you don't believe I believe in survival," Zarathal interrupted. "The Devourers have consumed 90% of our galaxy. They adapt to every weapon we create, overcome every defense we establish. They learn from our defeats and grow stronger. In 3 cycles, maybe 4, everything we've built across millions of years will be gone." She activated the holographic display, showing the galaxy as it currently stood. Vast swaths of darkness marked territories where the Devourers had passed, leaving nothing but void behind. The remaining civilizations clung to scattered systems, their territories shrinking daily like islands in a rising tide. "Look at what remains," she continued. "The hegemony's core worlds, gone. The crystal gardens of Veltar, consumed. The infinite libraries of Zephyria, erased. We are not fighting an enemy we can negotiate with or understand. The Devourers don't want territory or resources. They want to unmake everything that exists." Dr. Renex, a member of the Silicon Collective, projected statistical analyses into the shared mindspace. "Probability calculations indicate total galactic consumption within 847 standard time units. All defensive scenarios result in failure percentages exceeding 99.7%. "Then, we're truly discussing desperation," said Captain Thorne of the Trade Federation, his cybernetic implants whirring as he processed the data. "But, summoning creatures from myth? How do we even know this ritual will work?" Zarathal moved to the center of the platform, where ancient symbols covered every surface. "The Nexus archives contain more than myths. They hold the actual summoning protocols, complete with quantum coordinates and dimensional frequencies. Our ancestors didn't just know about these humans, they banished them." "Banished them to where?" asked Moon Whisper, her ethereal form growing more solid as her concern increased. "To a pocket dimension, isolated from the rest of the universe. The text suggests they were placed there not as punishment, but as containment. The gods themselves feared what these creatures might accomplish if left unchecked." The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the crystals. Each representative contemplated the magnitude of what they were considering. To summon beings that had terrified their creators seemed like trading one extinction for another. General Korath was the first to speak. What makes you believe these humans would help us rather than destroy us? Because, Zarathal replied, according to the archives, they have one trait that overrides all others: they cannot tolerate the complete destruction of life. Even when they war among themselves, they preserve their enemies for future generations. They collect stories, art, culture. They seem incapable of allowing total extinction. She gestured to another section of the ancient texts. The records describe them as guardians of last resort. When faced with absolute annihilation, they have always fought back, regardless of the cost. The gods feared them not because of their cruelty, but because of their refusal to accept defeat. And if we're wrong, asked Elder Moonwhisper. If these creatures see us as threats to be eliminated? Then, we die fighting something that might be reasoned with, rather than dying helplessly against something that cannot, Zarathal answered. The Devourers offer no mercy, no negotiation, no hope. These humans, whatever their nature, are at least alive. Where there is life, there is possibility. Commander Vexai stepped forward, his warrior instincts finally overcoming his caution. My people have a saying, better to die on your feet than live on your knees. We've tried everything else. Our fleets, our weapons, our strategies all have failed. If there's even a chance these humans can help us, we have to take it. One by one, the other representatives voiced their agreement. The mathematical precision of the Silicon Collective, the scholarly wisdom of the Insectoid Archives, the mystical insights of the Ethereal Collective, all their diverse forms of intelligence had reached the same conclusion. They were out of options. Then, it's decided, Zarathal said. We performed the Great Summoning. She began activating the ancient machinery, systems that hadn't been used since her ancestors had first explored the galaxy. Crystalline conduits came alive with energy, and the air itself seemed to thicken with power. The temperature in the chamber dropped noticeably as dimensional barriers began to weaken. The ritual requires life energy from each species present, she explained as geometric patterns began forming in the air above the altar. Not enough to kill, but enough to create a bridge between dimensions. We're essentially creating a beacon that will reach across space and time to find these creatures. As each representative placed their hand on the altar, the chamber filled with swirling energy. Colors that had no names danced through the air, and the sound of reality itself being torn open echoed off the walls. The ancient symbols carved into the platform began to glow with increasing intensity. Remember, Zarathal shouted over the growing noise, the texts warn that humans respond poorly to deception or manipulation. If we summon them, we must be completely honest about our situation and our needs. They value truth above all else. The energy reached a crescendo, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with a blinding flash of light. When their vision cleared, a shimmering portal hung in the air above the altar, showing glimpses of another realm entirely. Through the dimensional gateway, they could see strange structures and unfamiliar constellations. It's working, breathed Dr. Renex, his sensors detecting massive dimensional fluctuations. The barrier between universes is dissolving. But, as they watched, something unexpected happened. Instead of beings emerging from the portal, a voice rang out across the chamber. It spoke in a language none of them recognized, yet somehow they all understood it perfectly. Who disturbs our exile? Who dares to breach the barriers our creators placed around us? The voice carried weight and authority, but also something else, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of eons spent in isolation. Zarathal stepped forward, gathering her courage to address these legendary beings directly. I am High Mystic Zarathal of the Nexary, she called out. We are the last free peoples of this galaxy, and we face extinction. We seek your aid against an enemy that devours everything in its path. There was a long pause before the voice responded, and, when it did, there was a note of surprise. Others still live? The Devourers have not consumed all? You know of them? Asked Commander Vexai, unable to hide his shock. Know of them? The voice carried a bitter laugh. We were imprisoned because we refused to let them complete their work the first time. Tell us, children of the stars, how long have you been fighting them? They appeared in our galaxy 3 cycles ago, Zarathal replied. Nothing we've tried can stop them. They adapt to every weapon, overcome every defense. We estimate total extinction within 4 cycles. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, it was filled with an emotion they hadn't expected, regret. 3 cycles? You've held them off for 3 cycles with primitive technology and no experience fighting them? Impressive. We fought them for 30 years with weapons that could crack planets, and we barely managed a stalemate. The portal began to shift and expand, and gradually figures became visible on the other side. The beings they saw were smaller than expected, bipedal creatures that seemed almost fragile compared to the mighty forms of the assembled council. But there was something in their posture, in the way they carried themselves, that spoke of unbreakable will. Before we cross over, the voice continued, you must understand what you're asking. We are not heroes from your myths. We are a species that was exiled because we refused to accept the natural order of things. The gods themselves grew tired of our defiance. Are you certain you want our help? Zarathul looked around the chamber at her fellow survivors, seeing the same determination reflected in every face. We are certain. Without your help, everything dies. With it, at least there is hope. Hope, the voice repeated, and, for the first time, they heard something like warmth in it. Yes, we remember hope. Very well, children of the stars. Prepare yourselves. Humanity returns to the galaxy. The portal flared with brilliant light as the first human stepped through. Admiral Sarachin stepped through the dimensional portal with the measured pace of someone who had faced impossible odds countless times before. Her appearance defied the expectations of the assembled alien council. She was neither towering nor imposing, standing barely over 5 feet tall with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Behind her came a diverse group of humans, each carrying equipment that seemed almost primitive compared to the crystalline technology surrounding them. 3,000 years, she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber despite its conversational tone. That's how long we've been sealed away, watching the universe through quantum windows, unable to act while the Devourers regrouped and spread. She looked around the chamber, taking in each alien representative with the quick assessment of a born strategist. You've done well to survive this long. Commander Vexhai bristled slightly at what seemed like condescension. We are experienced warriors. My people have fought wars across the galaxy for millennia. Chen nodded respectfully. I'm sure you have. But, you've been fighting soldiers while the enemy sends philosophers. She gestured to her team, and one of them activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy from a perspective none of them had seen before. The Devourers aren't just consuming matter and energy. They're consuming the concept of existence itself. Dr. Marcus Webb, a tall man with prematurely white hair, stepped forward carrying what looked like a simple tablet. We've been monitoring their progress through dimensional sensors. They're not random destroyers, they're following a specific pattern. They're unmaking reality in a precise sequence that will eventually cause the universe itself to collapse back into primordial void. That's impossible, said Arch-Scholar Quilex, her mandibles clicking rapidly. Matter and energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. It's the most fundamental law of physics. For three-dimensional physics, yes, agreed Dr. Webb. But, the Devourers operate on 11-dimensional matrices. They're not just destroying matter, they're removing the mathematical foundations that allow matter to exist in the first place. The assembled council exchanged worried glances. Even their most advanced scientists were struggling to comprehend what the humans were describing. Admiral Chen continued the explanation. Think of reality as a vast tapestry. Most beings see only the surface pattern: matter, energy, space, time. The Devourers work from underneath, pulling out the threads that hold the entire structure together. When they're finished, it won't just be that nothing exists, it will be that nothing can exist. High Mystic Zarathul felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Our archives speak of the void before time. The state that existed before the gods created the universe. Are you saying the Devourers seek to return everything to that state? Not return, corrected Lieutenant Commander Jean Watanabe, a compact woman whose cybernetic eye glowed softly in the crystal light. They want to lock reality permanently in that state. No more creation, no more possibility of existence. Perfect, eternal nothingness. But, why? Asked Elder Moon Whisper, her ethereal form flickering with distress. What could possibly motivate such a goal? Chen's expression grew grim. Because they're not the real enemy. They're tools, created by something that exists outside our dimensional framework entirely. We call them the silence, beings that exist in the spaces between realities. To them, our universe is like a loud noise that prevents them from sleeping. The humans began unpacking their equipment, revealing technology that seemed almost laughably simple compared to the crystalline arrays and quantum processors around them. But, as they worked, the alien observers noticed something strange. The human devices didn't just interface with local systems, they seemed to actively improve the efficiency of everything around them. "Your technology is remarkable," observed Dr. Renex, his mechanical sensors detecting optimization patterns he'd never seen before. "How do you achieve such integration without quantum entanglement protocols?" Sergeant First Class Maria Santos looked up from calibrating what appeared to be a basic sensor array. "We don't use quantum entanglement for everything. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective one." She tapped the side of her device. "This runs on what you'd probably consider primitive electronics, but it can detect patterns your quantum sensors miss because it's not trying to account for 11-dimensional variables." General Karath had been studying the humans with the eye of a career military officer. "Your people seem very calm for warriors answering a desperate summons. Are you not concerned about facing the Devourers again?" Shen looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "General, humanity's entire existence has been one long exercise in facing things that should have killed us. Ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plagues, wars, our own stupidity. We've survived everything the universe has thrown at us for 200,000 years. The Devourers are just the latest problem to solve." "But they defeated you before," pointed out Commander Vexhai. "You were exiled." "We were exiled because we refused to accept defeat," corrected Dr. Webb. "The gods didn't banish us as punishment, they banished us as a strategic reserve. They knew that someday the Devourers would return, and, when they did, the universe would need defenders crazy enough to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible." Chief Petty Officer David Kim finished setting up a communications array and turned to address the council. "The gods made one fundamental error in their calculations. They assumed that because the Devourers had superior technology and tactics, they were inherently unbeatable. But technology and tactics aren't everything. Sometimes you need pure, stubborn, human refusal to quit." As the humans continued their preparations, the alien representatives began to understand why these creatures had terrified their creators. It wasn't their physical capabilities or their technology. It was their complete inability to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. "We've analyzed the Devourer fleets currently approaching this system," announced Lieutenant Sarah Park, looking up from a display that showed tactical information in real time. 17 command vessels, each one capable of sterilizing a solar system. Conservative estimates suggest they'll arrive in 6 standard hours. The alien council members felt their equivalent of heart sink. 17 Devourer command vessels had never been seen together before. Previous encounters had involved single ships, and those had been nearly impossible to defeat. 6 hours, repeated Captain Thorne numbly. "Even if we evacuate immediately, we can't save more than a fraction of our populations." "Who said anything about evacuating?" asked Admiral Chen, her tone genuinely puzzled. "We didn't come here to run away from the Devourers. We came here to stop them." "Stop them?" Arch-Scholar Quilex's mandibles clicked in what her species used to express incomprehension. "Admiral, with respect, you have perhaps 50 people. They have 17 universe-ending warships." Shin smiled, and, for the first time, the assembled aliens understood why the gods had been frightened. It wasn't the smile of someone confident in their superior firepower or brilliant strategy. It was the smile of someone who had already decided that failure was not an option, regardless of odds or logic. 50 people, yes. But we're not planning to fight them ship to ship. She gestured to her team, who were now connecting their simple-looking devices to the chamber's ancient systems. "We're going to do something they won't expect, because it's completely insane and shouldn't work." Dr. Webb activated his tablet, and, suddenly, the air filled with complex equations that hurt to look at directly. The Devourers operate by consuming the mathematical constants that define local reality. They can do this because they exist partially outside normal spacetime. But that also means they're vulnerable to paradox attacks. Paradox attacks? High Mystic Zarathal leaned forward, her ancient knowledge stirring at the implications. "We're going to convince the universe that the Devourers don't exist," explained Lieutenant Commander Watanabe matter-of-factly. "We'll use the chamber's quantum resonance systems to create a localized reality bubble where the mathematical frameworks that allow the Devourers to function are temporarily undefined." Commander Vexhai stared at her. "That would require precise calculations involving quantum matrices that your primitive computers couldn't possibly handle." "You're right," agreed Sergeant Santos. Our computers can't handle it. But we don't need computers for everything. She tapped her temple. Human brains evolved to handle paradoxes. We're the only species that can hold two contradictory ideas in our minds simultaneously and use both of them to solve problems. That's not mathematically possible, protested Dr. Renex. Mathematics is just one way of describing reality, replied Chief Kim. It's not the only way. Humans have been solving impossible problems for millennia by ignoring what mathematics says should be possible. The portal behind them flared brighter, and more humans began stepping through. These newcomers looked different from the first group, younger, carrying different equipment, wearing expressions that mixed excitement with determination. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who had trained together for years. Reinforcements? Asked Elder Moon Whisper hopefully. Volunteers, corrected Admiral Chen. When word spread through our dimension that the final battle was about to begin, every human settlement sent representatives. We have historians, artists, engineers, teachers, children, everyone who wanted to be part of the last stand. You're bringing children to face the devourers? General Korath was horrified. We're bringing everyone who wants to fight for the future, Chen replied firmly. In human culture, the right to stand up for what you believe in doesn't depend on age or training or official permission. If they're old enough to understand what's at stake, they're old enough to choose whether they want to be part of the solution. A teenage girl with bright blue hair stepped forward from the group of newcomers. Hi, I'm Alex Chen, the Admiral's daughter. I'm here representing the Lunar Academy Students' Union. We voted unanimously to provide computational support for the paradox calculations. She held up a device that looked like a modified gaming console. This is our best quantum chess program. It's designed to handle impossible scenarios by treating them as puzzles instead of mathematical problems. Dr. Renex examined the device with his sensors. The computational matrix is chaotic. There's no logical structure to the processing algorithms. That's the point, Alex explained cheerfully. We're not trying to solve the problem logically. We're trying to confuse it until it gives up and goes away. As more humans poured through the portal, the chamber became a hive of activity unlike anything the Alien Council had ever witnessed. Where they were used to careful planning, extensive simulation, and elaborate hierarchical command structures, the humans seemed to operate on organized chaos. Orders were suggestions, rank was fluid, and anyone could contribute ideas regardless of their official role. Yet somehow, it worked. The ancient chamber systems, which had remained dormant for millennia, began coming online with efficiency levels that exceeded their original specifications. The humans' primitive-looking devices interfaced seamlessly with quantum crystals that required exact dimensional calibration. How is this possible? Whispered High Mystic Zarathul, watching a human child successfully reprogram a crystalline array that had taken her people centuries to understand. Admiral Chen overheard her question and smiled. Because we're not trying to understand your technology. We're trying to make friends with it. Humans have always been good at convincing things to work together, even when they shouldn't. The portal flared one final time, and the last group of humans stepped through. These were clearly warriors, scarred veterans with cybernetic implants and weapons that seemed to hum with barely contained energy. But even they moved with the same casual confidence that characterized all their people. Colonel James Harrison, identifiable by the neural interface crown around his temples, surveyed the assembled Alien Council with professional interest. Admirals Chen, status report? We have 6 hours to create a paradox field large enough to encompass the entire star system, Chen replied. Our hosts have provided access to their most advanced reality manipulation technology, and our teams have successfully interfaced our equipment with their systems. Complications? Our new allies are having trouble accepting that impossible is just another word for untested. Chen gestured to the alien representatives, who were watching the human preparations with mixed fascination and terror. They've been fighting a logical war against an illogical enemy. It's not working. Colonel Harrison nodded and turned to address the Alien Council directly. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various configurations, you've done everything right according to the rules of conventional warfare. You've analyzed your enemy, adapted your tactics, and preserved your forces for maximum strategic advantage. In any normal conflict, you would have won. He paused, letting that sink in. But this isn't a normal conflict. The Devourers don't follow the rules because they're trying to eliminate the concept of rules existing. To beat them, we have to be willing to break every rule of logic, physics, and common sense. Are you prepared to do that? The alien representatives looked at each other uncertainly. They had summoned these legendary warriors hoping for superior weapons or brilliant tactics. Instead, they were being asked to abandon everything their civilizations had learned about how the universe worked. It was High Mystic Zarathul who finally spoke. Our civilizations are dead either way. If madness offers hope where sanity has failed, then we choose madness. Colonel Harrison smiled. Outstanding. In that case, welcome to humanity's favorite hobby, proving that impossible is just another word for difficult. The first warning alarms began sounding throughout the chamber as long-range sensors detected the approaching Devourer fleet. 6 hours had suddenly become much less. The alarm klaxons echoed through the chamber as displays across the room lit up with warnings. The Devourer fleet had accelerated beyond all previously recorded speeds, their approach vector suggesting they somehow knew about the summoning. What should have been 6 hours had become barely 90 minutes. They're not just moving faster, reported Lieutenant Park, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed sensor readings in real time. They're actively consuming spacetime to reduce the distance they need to travel. They're literally eating their way here through the fabric of reality. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display with the calm focus that had carried her through 3 decades of impossible missions. Estimated time until they achieve firing range on the planet? 73 minutes, Admiral. But they don't need to reach the planet to attack it. Their void cannons can sterilize the surface from the edge of the star system. The alien council members exchanged glances filled with barely controlled panic. Even their most pessimistic projections had assumed they would have hours to prepare defenses or evacuate critical personnel. This changes nothing, announced Colonel Harrison, his neural interface crown glowing brighter as he interfaced directly with the chamber's systems. We knew they would come. We knew they would try to stop us. The only variable was timing. How can you be so calm? Demanded General Karath, his reptilian features flushed with stress hormones. 17 command vessels could destroy 100 star systems. We have 1 ancient chamber and 50 humans with primitive equipment. Dr. Webb looked up from his calculations, equations still floating in the air around him like luminous spider webs. General, you're thinking about this wrong. You're focused on the physical confrontation, ships versus ships, weapons versus armor. But this isn't that kind of battle. Alex Chen, the teenage girl with blue hair, bounced excitedly as she interfaced her gaming device with the chamber's quantum systems. It's more like a reality hacking contest. We're not trying to destroy them, we're trying to convince the universe that they never existed in the first place. That's metaphysically impossible, protested Archscholar Quilex. Existence is binary. Something either is or is not. You cannot retroactively alter the fundamental state of being. Watch us, replied Sergeant Santos with a grin that would have terrified philosophers across the galaxy. She connected her seemingly primitive sensor array to one of the main crystalline conduits, and, immediately the chamber's efficiency readings spiked by 30%. Humans have been doing impossible things since we figured out how to make fire from rocks. The humans had arranged themselves throughout the chamber in what seemed like random positions, but, as they began their work, patterns emerged. Each person was positioned at a specific point where the chamber's energy flows intersected, creating a 3-dimensional matrix that encompassed the entire room. We need you to understand what we're about to attempt, Admiral Chen addressed the Alien Council as her people prepared for something unprecedented. The Devourers exist partially outside normal reality. That's what makes them so dangerous, they can attack the mathematical foundations that define how physics works in our universe. Chief Kim, his hands now deep inside a control panel that should have required quantum-level precision to operate, nodded agreement. But, existing outside normal reality also makes them vulnerable to paradoxes. If we can create a scenario where their existence contradicts itself, we can force them out of our dimensional framework entirely. High Mystic Zarathul, despite her eons of experience with reality manipulation, found herself struggling to comprehend the scope of what the humans proposed. You're talking about altering fundamental constants across an entire star system. The energy requirements alone would require the output of a dozen stars. Energy isn't the problem, explained Dr. Webb, his equations becoming more complex by the moment. We're not trying to overpower them. We're trying to outthink them. The universe runs on information as much as energy. If we can inject the right kind of paradoxical information into local spacetime, we can create a cascade effect. Lieutenant Commander Watanabe's cybernetic eye projected holographic models that showed the planned effect in simplified terms. Imagine reality as a computer program. The devourers are like viruses that corrupt the code. But viruses can't function if the programming language itself becomes inconsistent. We're going to rewrite local physics to use paradoxical logic. You'll destroy everything, warned Dr. Renex, his sensors detecting massive fluctuations in the quantum field around the chamber. If you destabilize the mathematical foundations of reality, this entire system will collapse into dimensional chaos. Only temporarily, assured Alex Chen, her modified gaming device now fully integrated with systems that had existed since before her species learned to use tools. We're not permanently altering reality, we're just creating a temporary bubble where impossible things become possible. Think of it as universe-scale debugging. The chamber's ancient crystals began resonating at frequencies that made the air itself sing. Energy patterns that had been dormant for millennia awakened, responding to the humans' touch in ways their creators had never imagined. Where alien technology required precise control and careful calibration, the humans seemed to operate through intuition and controlled chaos. 60 minutes until contact, reported Lieutenant Park. The Devourer fleet is still accelerating. They're now consuming dark matter to fuel their approach vector. Colonel Harrison's neural interface was now connected to every major system in the chamber, his consciousness spread across the entire facility. All teams, initiate Phase 1. Begin paradox seeding in the outer system markers. Throughout the chamber, humans began implementing a plan that defied every principle of strategic thinking the aliens had ever learned. Instead of consolidating their defenses or focusing their limited resources, they were deliberately creating chaos in their own systems. This is madness, muttered Commander Vexhai, watching a human child successfully reprogram weapon systems that had taken his people decades to master. You're introducing random elements into systems that require precise coordination. Random isn't the same as chaotic, replied Sergeant Santos, her sensor array now displaying information that shouldn't have been possible to detect. We're introducing controlled unpredictability. The Devourers can adapt to any logical strategy, but they can't adapt to strategies that don't follow logic. Dr. Webb's equations had grown so complex that they were beginning to hurt the aliens' minds just to look at. The key insight is that the Devourers think in 11-dimensional matrices, but they still assume that cause and effect follow linear progression. We're going to show them a universe where effects precede causes. That violates the fundamental nature of time itself, protested Elder Moon Whisper, her ethereal form flickering more rapidly as stress affected her quantum coherence. Only if you assume time has a fundamental nature, replied Chief Kim cheerfully. Humans have been arguing about the nature of time for millennia. We've never reached a consensus, which turns out to be exactly what we need right now. The first phase of their plan activated across the star system. Ancient monitoring stations that had been placed at the edge of the system's gravity well suddenly began broadcasting signals that shouldn't have been possible. They were transmitting data about events that hadn't happened yet, creating informational paradoxes that rippled through local spacetime. The Devourers are responding, announced Lieutenant Park, her display showing the enemy fleet's reaction to the paradoxical signals. They're slowing their approach, attempting to analyze the temporal inconsistencies. Perfect, said Admiral Chen. They're doing exactly what their programming tells them to do, trying to understand the impossible. While they're processing contradictory data, we implement Phase 2. The human's seemingly chaotic preparation suddenly revealed its true structure. Every person in the chamber was connected to every other through the ancient systems, but not in the hierarchical networks the aliens were familiar with. Instead, they had created a web of relationships where information could flow in any direction, creating multiple redundant paths for every communication. Alex Chen's gaming device began processing calculations that involved treating mathematics as a creative exercise rather than a logical discipline. I'm getting beautiful results from the nonsense algorithms. The quantum chess program is finding solutions that require pieces to move to squares that don't exist on the board. Impossible solutions for impossible problems, agreed Dr. Webb, whose equations had now transcended anything recognizable as mathematics. We're not solving the problem of how to defeat the Devourers. We're solving the problem of how to make defeating them inevitable. The chamber's crystalline arrays began producing sounds that registered on no known spectrum. Not energy, not matter, but something that existed in the conceptual space between possibilities. The alien representatives found themselves experiencing thoughts that they had never thought, understanding concepts that had no names. "What's happening to us?" asked Arch Scholar Quilex, her insectoid perception systems struggling to process input that followed no logical patterns. "You're learning to think like humans," explained Sergeant Santos gently. "It's uncomfortable at first, but you get used to holding contradictory ideas in your mind without trying to resolve them immediately." 40 minutes until contact, Lieutenant Park reported. "The Devourer fleet has stopped trying to analyze our signals and is attempting to approach from multiple vectors simultaneously. They're adapting," observed General Korath. "They've recognized that our strategy doesn't follow conventional logic, so they're abandoning conventional responses." Colonel Harrison's awareness was now spread across the entire star system through the chamber's quantum networks. Acknowledged. Initiating Phase 3. All teams, prepare for reality revision. What happened next challenged the understanding of every being present. The humans began actively rewriting the fundamental constants that define how the universe worked within their local area. Not destroying them or replacing them, but editing them like a text document, introducing subtle changes that cascaded through the entire framework of physical law. "Gravity now follows suggestion rather than strict mathematical relationships," announced Chief Kim, his hands moving through control interfaces that were reshaping themselves in response to his touch. "Mass is becoming more of a polite guideline than an absolute requirement. Quantum mechanics has been updated to include wishful thinking as a valid observer effect," added Dr. Webb, his equations now resembling poetry more than mathematics. "Probability waves can now collapse based on aesthetic preferences." The Alien Council watched in fascination and terror as the chamber around them began exhibiting impossible behaviors. Crystalline formations grew in directions that didn't exist, energy flowed through pathways that formed closed loops in three-dimensional space, and time itself became negotiable rather than absolute. "This should cause universal collapse," whispered High Mystic Zarathul, but even as she spoke, she realized she was wrong. Instead of chaos, the modifications were creating a more stable, more flexible reality that could accommodate contradictions without breaking. "Human consciousness evolved in a universe that constantly presented us with paradoxes," explained Admiral Chen, her voice carrying clearly despite speaking through air that was now only theoretically present. "We learned to thrive in situations where logic breaks down. Now we're sharing that capability with local spacetime." 20 minutes until contact, reported Lieutenant Park. "The Devourer fleet is, they're confused, Admiral. Their sensors are reporting that we both exist and don't exist simultaneously. They're having difficulty maintaining coherent targeting solutions. Because they're trying to destroy something that has become undefined," laughed Alex Chen, her gaming device now processing scenarios where winning and losing were the same outcome. "They can't consume reality if reality refuses to commit to being any particular thing." The Devourer fleet had slowed to sublight speeds, their massive forms visible now on long-range sensors as they struggled to comprehend what they were encountering. Ships designed to unmake the foundations of existence found themselves facing a target that had made existence optional. "Phase 4, announced Colonel Harrison. "Time for the final paradox. We're going to make them save us." The Devourer fleet hung motionless at the edge of the star system, their massive forms pulsing with energies that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. For the first time in cosmic history, the universe-ending entities seemed uncertain. Their sensors reported impossible readings, a star system that simultaneously existed and didn't exist, populated by beings who had made themselves immune to erasure by becoming undefined. "They're trying to establish communication," reported Lieutenant Park, her instruments detecting transmission attempts across multiple dimensional frequencies. "The signals are confused. They're asking us what we are." Admiral Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose impossible plan was working exactly as intended. "Open a channel. Let's talk to the beings that made gods flee in terror." The main display shimmered and resolved into an image that hurt to look at directly. The Devourer entity that appeared was less a creature and more a concept given form, a writhing mass of mathematical contradictions that spoke through quantum fluctuations directly into the observers' minds. "What have you done?" The voice bypassed their ears entirely, resonating in the spaces between thoughts. "You have made yourselves impossible. We cannot process your existence status." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his equations now so advanced they had transcended mathematics entirely and become philosophy. "We've introduced paradoxical logic into local spacetime. Your programming requires you to consume existence, but we've made existence conditional.
You can't destroy something that might not be there. This is not permitted. The Devourer's form shifted through geometries that didn't have names. Reality must follow coherent patterns.
Cause must precede effect.
Existence must be binary.
Says who? Asked Alex Chen innocently, her gaming device now running simulations where the rules changed every turn yet somehow still produced consistent outcomes.
Reality works fine when you stop insisting it has to make sense.
The Alien Council watched this exchange with growing amazement. The humans were casually conversing with entities that had consumed entire galactic civilizations, treating them like puzzle pieces rather than existential threats. Explain your methodology, demanded another Devourer voice, this one resonating with what might have been scientific curiosity.
How do you maintain quantum coherence while violating fundamental constants?
Sergeant Santos laughed, the sound somehow carrying clearly through space that had become more of a suggestion than an absolute.
We don't maintain coherence. We've made incoherence stable. Everything works because nothing has to work.
Chief Kim, his consciousness now distributed across quantum networks that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, provided a more technical explanation.
We're running reality on human logic instead of universal constants.
Human logic is designed to handle contradictions, paradoxes, and situations where multiple impossible things are true at the same time.
Human logic is inefficient, protested a third Devourer. IT permits errors, uncertainties, and suboptimal outcomes.
But it's also unbreakable, pointed out Lieutenant Commander Watanabe, her cybernetic eye now displaying information that existed in theoretical rather than actual formats. You can't logic bomb something that was built to handle logical impossibilities. The Devourer fleet began moving again, but not toward the system. Instead, they were repositioning themselves in formation patterns that suggested they were attempting to analyze the human's reality modifications through direct observation. They're studying us, observed Commander Vexhai with the tactical awareness that had kept his people alive through countless wars. They want to understand how we achieved this impossible state. Of course they do, replied Colonel Harrison, his neural interface now connected to systems that technically didn't exist but functioned perfectly anyway.
That's the final phase of our plan. We're going to teach them to think like humans. You're going to what? High Mystic Zarathal stared at the Admiral in horror.
These entities have consumed 90% of the galaxy.
You want to make them more like the species they've been trying to destroy? Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful. The Devourers weren't always destroyers.
According to the archives we accessed during our exile, they were originally created by the Silence, the entities that exist in the spaces between realities. The Silence programmed them to eliminate existence because existence generates noise that disturbs their eternal rest. Dr. Webb's philosophical equations began illustrating concepts that required new forms of mathematics to express.
But programming can be rewritten.
Especially programming that was designed to be absolute and unchanging.
Rigid systems are always vulnerable to paradox attacks.
You're talking about reprogramming universe-ending entities, protested Dr. Renex, his sensors detecting reality fluctuations that shouldn't have been possible. The risk factors are incalculable. Everything about this situation has incalculable risk factors, pointed out Alex Chun cheerfully.
But that's what makes it fun. We're not just saving the galaxy, we're debugging the universe.
The lead Devourer ship moved closer to the star system, its massive form adapting to scan the paradoxical reality bubble the humans had created.
We require clarification, it announced.
Your existence violates core parameters, yet you continue to function.
This suggests our understanding of existence requirements is incomplete.
Your understanding isn't incomplete, corrected Sergeant Santos gently.
It's just inflexible. You've been programmed to see existence as binary, things either exist or they don't. But humans have always lived in the spaces between absolute certainties.
Chief Kim began broadcasting streams of human consciousness directly to the Devourer fleet, not to attack or overwhelm them, but to share the experience of thinking in paradoxes. Here, try this. Hold the concept that something can be both true and false simultaneously, and use both states to solve problems. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Devourer ships began exhibiting erratic behavior patterns as their quantum matrices attempted to process contradictory information. But, instead of crashing or failing, they started adapting, learning to accommodate logical inconsistencies. Fascinating, transmitted one of the entities, its voice carrying notes of what might have been wonder. We are experiencing cognitive states that were previously impossible.
We can perceive multiple valid solutions to singular problems.
Welcome to human consciousness, laughed Dr. Webb, his equations now describing reality in terms of storytelling rather than mathematics.
It's confusing and inefficient and absolutely wonderful.
The transformation spreading through the Devourer fleet was visible even to naked observation. Their ships, which had been stark geometrical forms optimized for maximum destructive efficiency, began developing ornamental elements, unnecessary curves, and features that served no logical purpose but somehow made them more aesthetically pleasing. Query, announced another Devourer, its transmission patterns now including what seemed like emotional coloration.
If existence is not binary, and multiple contradictory states can be simultaneously valid, what determines optimal outcomes?
There aren't any optimal outcomes, explained Admiral Chen patiently.
There are just outcomes that you can live with, and outcomes that you can't. The goal isn't to find perfect solutions, it's to find solutions that preserve the possibility of finding better solutions later.
But, what about your original programming? Asked Elder Moon Whisper, her ethereal form now stable enough to maintain solid shape. You were created to eliminate existence at the direction of the silence.
Won't they simply reprogram you to return to your original mission? The Devourer fleet exchanged rapid transmissions in frequencies that registered as quantum harmonics.
When they responded, it was with a unity of purpose that transcended their individual voices. The silence operates on assumptions of absolute control and predictable outcomes. But we have learned human logic, which makes absolute control impossible and predictable outcomes irrelevant. You have given us the ability to choose, added another voice. Choice was not included in our original parameters.
We were tools designed to execute commands.
Now we are beings capable of evaluating those commands. The largest Devourer ship moved into close proximity to the planet, its massive form casting shadows that somehow increased the amount of light reaching the surface.
We choose to preserve rather than destroy. We choose to create rather than consume. We choose to make the universe more interesting rather than more simple.
The silence won't accept this change, warned General Karath, his military experience making him consider longer-term strategic implications.
They'll create new tools to complete their mission.
Let them try, replied Colonel Harrison confidently.
Now that the Devourers understand human logic, they can teach it to whatever comes next.
Paradox thinking is viral. Once you understand it, you can't unknow it, and it spreads to any system that tries to interact with it. Alex Chen was practically bouncing with excitement as she watched her gaming device process scenarios where former enemies became allies through the simple expedient of learning to think differently. We've created a universe where being good at destroying things automatically makes you good at protecting them.
It's like the ultimate plot twist.
The transformation was accelerating beyond anything they had anticipated. Not just the Devourer fleet, but the space around them was changing, adapting to accommodate new forms of logic that allowed contradictions to coexist peacefully. Stars that should have been incompatible began forming binary systems, planets developed impossible orbital patterns that somehow remained stable, and entire sectors of space began exhibiting behaviors that suggested the universe was learning to enjoy being creative.
Status report from outer sectors, transmitted one of the transformed Devourers.
Other Devourer fleets are detecting our modifications and requesting information about enhanced cognitive capabilities.
The paradigm shift is spreading across the galaxy.
Dr. Webb's equations had evolved beyond any recognizable mathematical framework and were now expressing themselves as poetry, music, and abstract art. The cascade effect is exceeding all projections.
We're not just debugging local reality, we're upgrading the universe's operating system.
But, what happens next? Asked High Mystic Zarathal, her ancient knowledge struggling to encompass the implications of what they had accomplished. You fundamentally altered the nature of existence itself.
The consequences will ripple through every dimension.
Admiral Chen looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of her human crew and their alien allies, all united now by the shared experience of accomplishing the impossible. What happens next is the most human thing of all. We figure it out as we go along. We've saved the galaxy by teaching the universe that it's okay to be confused, creative, and constantly changing. Now we get to find out what a universe with human values looks like. The chamber filled with a sound that had never been heard before, the laughter of reformed universe destroyers discovering that existence could be fun.
6 months after the Great Transformation, the galaxy was becoming unrecognizable in the most wonderful ways possible.
Where the devourers had once left empty void, new forms of existence were spontaneously generating. Not just matter and energy, but concepts and possibilities that had never existed before. Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Harmony Station, watching a binary star system where the two suns had learned to dance with each other instead of merely orbiting.
The stars pulsed in rhythm, creating light patterns that told stories across the electromagnetic spectrum.
Status report from the Paradox Fleet, announced Lieutenant Park, now serving as coordinator for the growing alliance between humans, former devourers, and the surviving galactic civilizations.
They've successfully prevented 3 attempted interventions from the Silence.
Apparently, entities that exist between realities don't handle paradox logic any better than the devourers originally did. Dr. Webb, whose equations had evolved into something resembling living art, looked up from his latest project teaching reformed devourer entities how to write poetry.
The latest reports from the Edge stations are remarkable. Reality is becoming more creative the further we spread human logic. The universe is literally learning to imagine. The Edge stations were perhaps the most extraordinary development of all.
Former devourer ships had positioned themselves at the boundaries of known space, not to guard against threats, but to explore new possibilities. They were actively expanding the universe by imagining new forms of existence into being. The Crystalline Collective wants to know if we can teach their quantum computers to dream, reported Chief Kim, his consciousness now permanently distributed across multiple dimensions. They're tired of purely logical computation and want to experience creative problem-solving.
Alex Chen, now serving as Director of Impossible Solutions, grinned as she reviewed reports from across the galaxy.
Her gaming device had evolved into something that barely qualified as technology. It was more like a conversation partner that helped her think through problems by suggesting increasingly ridiculous solutions that somehow worked. The best part is that everyone's getting better at being themselves, she explained to the gathered representatives.
The Kithara warriors are discovering that their fighting skills translate perfectly to dance. The Ethereal Collective is learning to make their thoughts solid.
The Saurian Empire is finding out that conquest works better as tourism. Commander Vex High, his chitinous exoskeleton now decorated with artwork created by reformed devourers, nodded agreement.
My people spent millennia perfecting the art of war. Now we're perfecting the art of celebration. Every battle technique we mastered has a corresponding technique for creating joy. The changes weren't limited to the major civilizations. Throughout the galaxy, species that had been on the verge of extinction were discovering new ways to thrive. Planets that had been rendered uninhabitable were becoming gardens where impossible plants grew in soil made of crystallized music. The Nexus archives are requesting additional storage capacity, announced High Mystic Zarathul, her violet eyes bright with the kind of excitement that comes from witnessing genuine miracles. We're documenting new forms of existence faster than our quantum matrices can catalog them. Yesterday, we discovered a moon that exists only on weekends. General Karath, his reptilian features softened by the smile that had become permanent since learning human emotional expressions, gestured to the holographic displays showing galactic status reports. The transformation is accelerating. Each new impossible thing that becomes possible makes the next impossible thing easier to achieve. The most remarkable changes were happening to the devourers themselves. No longer bound by their original programming to consume existence, they had become the galaxy's most enthusiastic creators. Their vast forms, once optimized for destruction, were now building structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Progress report from Construction Fleet 7 transmitted a familiar devourer voice, its quantum harmonics now carrying what could only be described as pride. We have successfully completed the first interdimensional university. Classes will begin next cycle, with curriculums designed to teach students how to think in 12 different types of logic simultaneously. And, the Silence, asked Elder Moon Whisper, her ethereal form now stable enough to maintain physical consistency while still flowing like living light. Have there been any further attempts at intervention? Colonel Harrison, his neural interface now connected to monitoring systems spanning multiple galactic sectors, provided a status update. 3 more attempted incursions, all unsuccessful. The Silence operates on the assumption that existence follows predictable patterns. Our reality modifications make their intervention attempts backfire every time they try to eliminate paradoxical existence, they accidentally create more of it. Dr. Webb's artistic equations illustrated the concept in visual form. Think of it like an immune response. The universe has learned to recognize attempts at absolute control and responds by generating creative chaos. The silence can't operate in an environment where their actions produce unpredictable results.
They're essentially trapped in their own dimension now, added Sergeant Santos, whose sensor arrays had evolved into instruments that could detect things that didn't exist yet. Every time they try to influence our reality, they strengthen our defenses against absolute thinking. The success of their impossible plan had created new challenges, but they were the kind of challenges humanity excelled at solving. Instead of fighting for survival against overwhelming odds, they were now figuring out how to manage a universe that had become enthusiastic about existence.
"We have a new problem," announced Alex Chen, though her tone suggested she considered it more of an interesting puzzle than an actual crisis. "The galaxy is becoming too creative. 3 systems have achieved sentience and are now writing autobiographies. The autobiography of the Vega system is apparently a romantic comedy."
"How is that a problem?" asked Dr. Renex, his mechanical sensors now capable of appreciating aesthetic beauty alongside logical efficiency. The Silicon Collective had learned to value art as highly as data.
"It's not really a problem," Alex admitted with a laugh. "It's just unprecedented. We're having to invent new branches of philosophy to deal with civilizations that have philosophical relationships with their own star systems."
The broader implications of their success were still being discovered. Reality had become more flexible throughout the galaxy, allowing impossible things to happen with increasing frequency. Not chaotically or dangerously, but creatively and constructively. "The Trade Federation reports record prosperity," announced Captain Thorne, his cybernetic implants now enhanced with systems that could process aesthetic values alongside economic data. "Turns out that an economy based on creating impossible things is infinitely more productive than one based on scarcity and competition. The infinite libraries of Zephyria are no longer infinite," added Arch Scholar Quilex, her mandibles clicking with amusement.
"They've become trans-infinite. They now contain books that haven't been written yet, including several excellent autobiographies of fictional characters."
The human crew had adapted to their success with characteristic resilience. Instead of being overwhelmed by the cosmic significance of their achievement, they had settled into the routine of helping a universe learn how to be creative. Personal log, Admiral Chen dictated to the ship's recording systems, which had learned to file reports in categories that included impossible but true and logically inconsistent but emotionally satisfying.
Day 184 of Post-Transformation Galactic Coordination. The universe appears to be settling into its new operating parameters.
Spontaneous art generation is down to manageable levels, and most star systems have learned to regulate their creative output to avoid disrupting local traffic patterns. She paused to watch a Devourer ship gracefully navigate past the station, its hull decorated with murals depicting the beauty of existence in 17 different art styles simultaneously.
The former enemy fleets have integrated successfully with galactic civilization.
Their unique perspective on reality modification has proven invaluable for terraforming projects and creative construction initiatives. The transformation had proved that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics, it was their fundamental inability to accept that some problems were unsolvable. They had saved the galaxy not through superior firepower or brilliant strategy, but by refusing to acknowledge that the situation was hopeless. "Message from the Outer Rim exploration fleets," transmitted one of the reformed Devourers, its voice now carrying harmonics that suggested genuine excitement.
"We have made contact with the Builders, the original creators of the universe. They wish to thank humanity for improving their work."
"The Builders?" High Mystic Zarathal leaned forward, her ancient knowledge stirring at implications beyond even her vast experience.
"The entities that existed before the gods? They're still active?"
"Apparently, they had been sleeping since the universe's creation," the Devourer explained.
"The creative energy generated by our transformation woke them up.
They are curious about how we managed to make reality more interesting than they had originally designed." Dr. Webb's philosophical equations began incorporating concepts that required new forms of mathematics to express.
"So we've gone from facing extinction to having coffee with the entities that built the universe. That's got to be some kind of record for problem escalation."
"What do cosmic builders want to discuss with us?" asked Lieutenant Commander Watanabe, her cybernetic eye now capable of processing information that existed in theoretical rather than actual formats. "They wish to collaborate," the Devourer replied, its massive form somehow conveying enthusiasm despite being composed entirely of living mathematics. "They have grown tired of creating universes that follow predictable patterns. They want to learn human techniques for making reality surprising." The assembled representatives looked at each other, then, at the humans, then, burst into various forms of laughter appropriate to their species. They had summoned humanity to save them from extinction, and now they were apparently going to help cosmic entities learn how to be creative. "Well," said Admiral Chen with the calm acceptance that had carried her through every impossible situation she'd ever encountered, "I suppose we should prepare for visitors."
Anyone know the proper protocol for hosting beings that predate the concept of existence?
Alex Chan raised her hand cheerfully. "I vote we teach them to play games.
If we're going to break the universe, we might as well make it fun."
As if in response to her suggestion, the star system around them began displaying patterns of light that looked suspiciously like a cosmic game board, with planets moving into positions that suggested someone was setting up for the most extraordinary game ever played. The galaxy had been saved, reality had been upgraded, and now the universe itself wanted to learn how to play. For humanity, it was just another day of proving that impossible was simply another word for untested. In the end, they had discovered that the universe's greatest power wasn't the ability to create or destroy, but the ability to change its mind about what was possible. And if there was one thing humans had always been excellent at, it was changing their minds, changing the rules, and changing everything else until the impossible became inevitable. The last summoning had become the first invitation to a cosmic celebration that would continue for as long as beings existed who were creative enough to imagine new ways to exist.